But where else can science find so good a field for biblical research as among this too neglected people? No doubt of their inheritance of the Baptists' doctrine, their traditions are without a break. What they teach now, their forefathers taught at every epoch where they appear in history. They are the disciples of that John who is said to have foretold the advent of Jesus, baptized him, and declared that the latchet of his shoe he, John, was not worthy to unloose. As they too, the messenger and the Messiah, stood in the Jordan, and the elder was consecrating the younger, his own cousin too, humanly speaking, the heavens opened, and God himself in the shape of a dove descended in a glory upon his beloved Son. How then, if this tale be true, can we account for the strange infidelity which we find among these surviving Nazareans? So far from believing Jesus the only begotten Son of God, they actually told the Persian missionaries who in the 17th century first discovered them to the Europeans that the Christ of the New Testament was a false teacher, and that the Jewish system, as well as that of Jesus, came from the realm of darkness. Who knows better than they? Where can more competent living witnesses be found? Christian ecclesiastics would force upon us an anointed Savior heralded by John, and the disciples of this very Baptist from the earliest centuries have stigmatized this ideal personage as an impostor, and his putative father, Jehovah, a spurious god, the Ilda Bauth of the Ophites. Unlucky for Christianity will be the day when some fearless and honest scholar shall persuade their elders to let him translate the contents of the secret books and compile their hoary traditions. It is a strange delusion that makes some writers think that the Nazareans have no other sacred literature, no other literary relics than 4 doctrinal works in that curious volume full of astrology and magic, which they are bound to peruse at the sunset hour on every Sol's Day, Sunday. This search after truth leads us, indeed, into devious ways. Many are the obstacles that ecclesiastical cunning has placed in the way of our finding the primal source of religious ideas. Christianity is on trial, and has been ever since science felt strong enough to act as public prosecutor. A portion of the case we are drafting in this book. What of truth is there in this theology? Through what sects has it been transmitted? Whence was it primarily derived? To answer, we must trace the history of the world religion, alike through the secret Christian sects as through those of other great religious subdivisions of the race. For the secret doctrine is the truth, and that religion is nearest divine that has contained it with least adulteration. Our search takes us hither and thither, but never aimlessly do we bring sects widely separated in chronological order into critical juxtaposition. There is one purpose in our work to be kept constantly in view: the analysis of religious beliefs and the definition of their descent from the past to the present. What has most blocked the way in Roman Catholicism, and not until the secret principles of this religion are uncovered, can we comprehend the iron staff upon which it leans to steady its now tottering steps. Alone, the name of Iao. Iao marks the upper center, or rather, the presumed spot where the unknown one may be supposed to dwell. Around the Iao runs the legend: the eternal son Abrasax, the central spiritual son of all the Kabbalists, represented in some diagrams of the latter by the circle of Tiphareth. From this region of unfathomable depth issues forth a circle formed of spirals, which in the language of symbolism means a grand cycle composed of smaller ones. Coiled within, so as to follow the spirals, lies the serpent, emblem of wisdom and eternity, the dual androgyne, the cycle representing Ennoia, or the divine mind, and the serpent. The agathodaimon, Ophis, the shadow of light. Both were the logoi of the Ophites, or the unity as logos manifesting itself as a double principle of good and evil, for according to their views, these two principles are immutable and existed from all eternity, as they will ever continue to exist. A favorite expression of Jesus was, "Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." If we can once appreciate the fact that among all the peoples of the highest antiquity, the most natural conception of the first cause manifesting itself in its creatures, and that to this they could not but ascribe the creation of all, was that of an androgyne deity, that the male principle was considered the vivifying, invisible spirit, and the female mother nature, we shall be enabled to understand how that mysterious cause came at first to be represented in the picture writings, perhaps, as the combination of the alpha and omega of numbers, a decimal, then as Iao, a trilateral name containing in itself a deep allegory. Iao, in such a case, would, etymologically considered, mean the breath of life, generated or springing forth between an upright male and an egg-shaped female principle of nature. For in Sanskrit, as means to be, to live, or exist, and originally it meant to breathe. From it, says Max Muller, in its original sense of breathing, the Hindus formed Asu, breath, and Asura, the name of God, whether it meant the breathing one or the giver of breath. It certainly meant the latter. In Hebrew, Ah and Ia mean life. Cornelius Agrippa, in his treatise on the preeminence of woman, shows that the word Eve suggests comparison with the mystic symbols of the Kabbalists, the name of the woman having affinity with the ineffable Tetragrammaton, the most sacred name of the divinity. Ancient names were always consonant with the things they represented. In relation to the mysterious name of the deity in question, the hitherto inexplicable hint of the Kabbalists as to the efficacy of the letter H, which Abram took away from his wife Sarah and put into the middle of his own name, becomes clear. The shrewd Talmudists have escaped the accusation for long centuries by screening themselves behind the Masoretic invention. But as in everything else, truth was at last brought to light. We know now that Iho must be read Iaho and Ia, not Jehovah. Ia of the Hebrews is plainly the Iakos, or Bacchus, of the mysteries, the god from whom the liberation of souls was expected. Dionysus, Iakos, Iaho, Ia. Aristotle then was right when he said, Jo was Oromazdes and Ahriman Pluto, for the god of heaven, Ahura Mazda, rides on a chariot which the horse of the sun follows. How little the philosophy of the old secret doctrine was understood is illustrated in the atrocious persecutions of the Templars by the Church, and in the accusation of their worshipping the devil under the shape of the goat Baphomet. Without going into the old Masonic mysteries, there is not a Mason, of those we mean who do know something, but has an idea of the true relation that Baphomet bore to Azazi, the scapegoat of the wilderness, whose character and meaning are entirely perverted in the Christian translations. This terrible and venerable name of God, says Lancy, librarian to the Vatican, through the pen of biblical glossers has been a devil, a mountain, a wilderness, and a he-goat. In Mackenzie's Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, the author very correctly remarks that this word should be divided into Azaz and El, for it signifies God of victory, but is here used in the sense of author of death. In contrast to Jehovah, the author of life, the latter received a dead goat as an offering. The Hindu Trinity is composed of three personages, which are convertible into one. The Trimurti is one, and in its abstract indivisible, and yet we see a metaphysical division taking place from the first. And while Brahma, though collectively representing the three, remains behind the scenes, Vishnu is the life-giver, the creator and the preserver, and Shiva is the destroyer and the death-giving deity. Death to the life-giver, life to the death-dealer. The symbolical antithesis is grand and beautiful, says Glidden. Deus est daemon inversus of the Kabbalists now becomes clear. It is but the intense and cruel desire to crush out the last vestige of the old philosophies by perverting their meaning, for fear that their own dogmas should not be rightly fathered on them, which impels the Catholic Church to carry on such a systematic persecution in regard to Gnostics, Kabbalists, and even the comparatively innocent Masons. If the alleged founder of the Christian religion is now, after the lapse of 19 centuries, preached, more or less unsuccessfully, however, in every corner of the globe, we are at liberty to think that the doctrines attributed to him would astonish and dismay him more than anyone else. A system of deliberate falsification was adopted from the first. How determined Irenaeus was to crush truth and build up a church of his own on the mangled remains of the 7 primitive churches mentioned in the Revelation may be inferred from his quarrel with Ptolemaeus. And this is again a case of evidence against which no blind faith can prevail. Ecclesiastical history assures us that Christ's ministry was but of 3 years' duration. There is a decided discrepancy on this point between the first 3 synoptics and the 4th gospel. But it was left for Irenaeus to show to Christian posterity that so early as AD 180, the probable time when this father wrote his works against heresies, even such pillars of the church as himself either knew nothing certain about it or deliberately lied and falsified dates to support their own views. So anxious was the worthy father to meet every possible objection against his plans that no falsehood, no sophistry was too much for him. In the sacred Jaina books of Patuna, the dying Gautama Buddha is thus addressed: "Arise into nirvana, from this decrepit body into which thou hast been sent. Ascend into thy former abode, O blessed Avatar." This seems to us the very opposite of nihilism. If Gautama is invited to reascend into his former abode, and this abode is nirvana, then it is incontestable that Buddhistic philosophy does not teach final annihilation. As Jesus is alleged to have appeared to his disciples after death, so to the present day is Gautama believed to descend from nirvana. And if he has an existence there, then this state cannot be a synonym for annihilation. Gautama, no less than all the other great reformers, had a doctrine for his elect and another for the outside masses, though the main object of his reform consisted in initiating all, so far as it was permissible and prudent to do without distinction of castes or wealth, to the great truths hitherto kept so secret by the selfish Brahmanical class. Gautama Buddha it was whom we see the first in the world's history, moved by that generous feeling which locks the whole humanity within one embrace, inviting the poor, the lame, and the blind to the king's festival table, from which he excluded those who had hitherto sat alone in haughty seclusion. It was he who, with a bold hand, first opened the door of the sanctuary to the pariah, the fallen one, and all those afflicted by men, clothed in gold and purple, often far less worthy than the outcast to whom their finger was scornfully pointing. All this did Siddhartha 6 centuries before another reformer, as noble and as loving, though less favored by opportunity in another land. If both, aware of the great danger of furnishing an uncultivated populace with the double-edged weapon of knowledge which gives power, left the innermost corner of the sanctuary in the profoundest shade, who that is acquainted with human nature can blame them for it? But while one was actuated by prudence, the other was forced into such a course. Gautama left the esoteric and most dangerous portion of the secret knowledge untouched, and lived to the ripe old age of 80, with the certainty of having taught the essential truths, and having converted to them 1/3 of the world. Jesus promised his disciples the knowledge which confers upon man the power of producing far greater miracles than he ever did himself, and he died leaving but a few faithful men, only halfway to knowledge, to struggle with the world to which they could impart but what they half knew themselves. Later their followers disfigured truth still more than they themselves had done. The inference to be drawn from all this is that the made-up and dogmatic Christianity of the Constantinian period is simply an offspring of the numerous conflicting sects, half-castes themselves born of pagan parents. Each of these could claim representatives converted to the so-called orthodox body of Christians, and as every newly born dogma had to be carried out by the majority of votes, every sect colored the main substance with its own hue, till the moment when the emperor enforced this revealed alla patria, of which he evidently did not himself understand a word, upon an unwilling world as the religion of Christ. Wearied in the vain attempt to sound this fathomless bog of international speculations, unable to appreciate a religion based on the pure spirituality of an ideal conception, Christendom gave itself up to the adoration of brutal force as represented by a church backed up by Constantine. Since then, among the 1,000 rites, dogmas, and ceremonies copied from paganism, the church can claim but one invention as thoroughly original with her, namely, the doctrine of eternal damnation, and one custom, that of the anathema. The pagans rejected both with horror. An execration is a fearful and grievous thing, says Plutarch, wherefore the priestess at Athens was commended for refusing to curse Alcibiades for desecration of the mysteries, when the people required her to do it, for she said that she was a priestess of prayers and not of curses. Pluto did not conceal the fact that he derived his best philosophical doctrines from Pythagoras, and that himself was merely the first to reduce them to systematic order, occasionally interweaving with them the metaphysical speculations of his own. But Pythagoras himself got his recondite doctrines first from the descendants of Maucus, and later from the Brahmins of India. He was also initiated into the mysteries among the Hierophants of Thebes, the Persian and Chaldean Magi. Thus, step by step do we trace the origin of most of our Christian doctrines to Middle Asia. Drop out from Christianity the personality of Jesus, so sublime because of its unparalleled simplicity, and what remains? History and comparative theology echo back the melancholy answer. A crumbling skeleton formed of the oldest pagan myths. While the mythical birth and life of Jesus are a faithful copy of those of the Brahmanical Krishna, his historical character of a religious reformer in Palestine is the true type of Buddha in India. In more than one respect, their great resemblance in philanthropic and spiritual aspirations, as well as external circumstances, is truly striking. Though the son of a king, while Jesus was but a carpenter, Buddha was not of the high Brahmanical caste by birth. Like Jesus, he felt dissatisfied with the dogmatic spirit of the religion of his country, the intolerance and hypocrisy of the priesthood, their outward show of devotion, and their useless ceremonials and prayers. As Buddha broke violently through the traditional laws and rules of the Brahmins, so did Jesus declare war against the Pharisees and the proud Sadducees. What the Nazarene did as a consequence of his humble birth and position, Buddha did as a voluntary penance. He traveled about as a beggar, and again, like Jesus, later in life he sought by preference the companionship of publicans and sinners. Each aimed at a social as well as at a religious reform, and giving a death blow to the old religions of his countries, each became the founder of a new one. And why should anyone feel surprised that Gautama could die with philosophical serenity? As the Kabbalists justly say, death does not exist, and man never steps outside of universal life. Those whom we think dead still live in us, and as we live in them, the more one lives for his kind, the less need he fear to die. And we might add that he who lives for humanity does even more than him who dies for it. But as we see, neither the Zohar nor any other Kabbalistic volume contains merely Jewish wisdom. The doctrine itself, being the result of whole millenniums of thought, is therefore the joint property of adepts of every nation under the sun. Nevertheless, the Zohar teaches practical occultism more than any other work on that subject. Not as it is translated, though, and commented upon by its various critics, but with the secret signs on its margins. These signs contain the hidden instructions, apart from the metaphysical interpretations and apparent absurdities so fully credited by Josephus, who was never initiated and gave out the dead letter as he had received it. The real practical magic contained in the Zohar and other Kabbalistic works is only of use to those who read it within. The Christian apostles, at least those who are said to have produced miracles at will, had to be acquainted with this science. It ill behooves a Christian to look with horror or derision upon magic gems, amulets, and other talismans against the evil eye, which serve as charms to exercise a mysterious influence, either on the possessor or the person whom the magician desires to control. There are still extant a number of such charmed amulets in public and private collections of antiquities. Illustrations of convex gems with mysterious legends, the meaning of which baffles all scientific inquiry, are given by many collectors. King shows several such in his Gnostics, and he describes a white carnelian, chalcedony, covered on both sides with interminable legends, to interpret which would ever prove a failure. Yes, in every case perhaps but that of a Hermetic student or an adept. But we refer the reader to his interesting work and the talismans described in his plates to show that even the seer of Patmos himself was well versed in this Kabbalistic science of talismans and gems. St. John clearly alludes to the potent white carnelian, a gem well known among adepts, as the alba petra, or the stone of initiation, on which the word prize is generally found engraved, as it was given to the candidate who had successfully passed through all the preliminary trials of a neophyte. The fact is that no less than the book of Job, the whole Revelation, is simply an allegorical narrative of the mysteries and initiation therein of a candidate, who is John himself. No high mason, well versed in the different degrees, can fail to see it. The numbers 7, 12, and others are all so many lights thrown over the obscurity of the work. Paracelsus maintained the same some centuries ago, and when we find the one like unto the Son of Man, saying, chapter 2, 17, to him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, the word which no man knoweth, saving he that receiveth it. What master mason can doubt but it refers to the last headline of this chapter? On that note, let me go ahead and read the last headline of the current chapter. It is the first hour of the day, the time when the veil of the temple was rent asunder, when darkness and consternation were spread over the earth, when the light was darkened, when the implements of masonry were broken, when the flaming star disappeared, when the cubic stone was broken, when the word was lost. In the pre-Christian Mithraic mysteries, the candidate who fearlessly overcame the 12 tortures which preceded the final initiation, received a small round cake or wafer of unleavened bread, symbolizing, in one of its meanings, the solar disk, and known as the heavenly bread or manna, and having figures traced on it. A lamb or a bull was killed, and with the blood the candidate had to be sprinkled, as in the case of the Emperor Julian's initiation. The 7 rules or mysteries were then delivered to the newly born that are represented in the Revelation as the 7 seals, which are opened in order. There can be no doubt that the seer of Patmos referred to this ceremony. The origin of the Roman Catholic amulets and relics blessed by the Pope is the same as that of the Ephesian spell, or magical characters engraved either on a stone or drawn on a piece of parchment. The Jewish amulets with verses out of the law and called phylacteria, and the Mohammedan charms with verses of the Quran. All these were used as protective magic spells and worn by the believers on their persons. Epiphanius, the worthy ex-Marcosian, who speaks of these charms when used by the Manichaeans as amulets, that is to say, things worn round the neck, periopta, and incantations and such like trickery, cannot well throw a slur upon the trickery of the pagans and Gnostics, without including the Roman Catholic and Popish amulets. Simon Magus was doubtless a pupil of the Tanaim of Samaria. The reputation which he left behind, together with the title given to him of the great power of God, testifies strongly in favor of the ability of his teachers. The calumnies so zealously disseminated against him by the unknown authors and compilers of the Acts and other writings could not cripple the truth to such an extent as to conceal the fact that no Christian could rival him in thaumaturgic deeds. The story told about his falling during an aerial flight, breaking both his legs, and then committing suicide is ridiculous. Instead of praying mentally that it should so happen, why did not the apostles pray rather that they should be allowed to outdo Simon in wonders and miracles? For then they might have proved their case far more easily than they did, and so converted thousands to Christianity. Posterity has heard but one side of the story. Were the disciples of Simon to have a chance, we might find perhaps that it was Peter who broke both his legs, had we not known that this apostle was too prudent ever to venture himself in Rome. On the confession of several ecclesiastical writers, no apostle ever performed such supernatural wonders. Of course, pious people will say this only the more proves that it was the devil who worked through Simon. Simon was accused of blasphemy against the Holy Ghost because he introduced it as the Holy Spiritus, the men's intelligence, or the mother of all. But we find the same expression used in the book of Enoch, in which, in contradistinction to the Son of Man, he says, Son of the woman. In the Codex of the Nazarenes and in the Zohar, as well as in the books of Hermes, the expression is usual, and even in the apocryphal Evangelium of the Hebrews, we read that Jesus himself admitted the sex of the Holy Ghost by using the expression, my mother, the holy Pneuma. It is also more than evident that there are moments in the life of the greatest liar when he may utter some truths. It is in this case so perfectly exemplified by the good fathers that we can see more clearly than ever whence proceeded the solemn condemnations at the Ecumenical Council of 1870 of certain heresies and the enforcement of other articles of faith in which none believed less than those who inspired the Pope to issue them. History has yet perhaps to learn that the octogenarian Pope, intoxicated with the fumes of his newly enforced infallibility, was but the faithful echo of the Jesuits. An old man is raised, trembling upon the pavoy of the Vatican, says Michelet. Everything becomes absorbed and confined in him. For 15 centuries, Christendom had submitted to the spiritual yoke of the Church, but that yoke was not sufficient for them. They wanted the whole world to bend under the hand of one master. They have succeeded. The Church is henceforth an inert tool, and the Pope a poor, weak instrument in the hands of this order. But for how long until the end comes? Well may sincere Christians remember the prophetic lamentations of the thrice great Trismegistus over his own country. Alas, alas, my son, a day will come when the sacred hieroglyphics will become but idols. The world will mistake the emblems of science for gods and accuse Grand Egypt of having worshipped hell monsters. But those who will calumniate us thus will themselves worship death instead of life, folly in place of wisdom. They will denounce love and fecundity, fill their temples with dead men's bones as relics, and waste their youth in solitude and tears. Their virgins will be widows, nuns, before being wives, and consume themselves in grief, because men will have despised and profaned the sacred mysteries of Isis. The doctrine of man's triune nature is as clearly defined in the Hermetic books as it is in Plato's system, or again in that of the Buddhist and Brahmanical philosophies. And this is one of the most important as well as least understood of the doctrines of Hermetic science. The Egyptian mysteries, so imperfectly known by the world, and only through the few brief allusions to them in the Metamorphoses of Apuleius, taught the greatest virtues. They unveiled to the aspirant in the higher mysteries of initiation that which many of our modern Hermetic students vainly search for in the Kabbalistic books, and which no obscure teachings of the Church under the guidance of the Order of Jesuits will ever be able to unveil. To compare then the ancient secret societies of the Hierophants with the artificially produced hallucinations of those few followers of Loyola, who were perchance sincere at the beginning of their career, is to insult the former. And yet, in justice to them, we are compelled to do so. In Egypt, every city of importance was separated from its burial place by a sacred lake. The same ceremony of judgment, which the Book of the Dead describes as taking place in the world of spirit, took place on earth during the burial of the mummy. 42 judges or assessors assembled on the shore and judged the departed soul according to its actions when in the body, and it was only upon a unanimous approval of this post-mortem jury that the boatman, who represented the spirit of death, could convey the justified defunct's body to its last resting place. After that, the priests returned within the sacred precincts and instructed the neophytes upon the probable solemn drama which was then taking place in the invisible realm, whither the soul had fled. The immortality of the spirit was strongly inculcated by the Al-Omja. In the Krato Rapua, the following is described as the 7 degrees of the initiation. After a preliminary trial at Thebes, where the neophyte had to pass through many trials, called the 12 tortures, he was commanded to govern his own passions and never lose for a moment the idea of his God. Then, as a symbol of the wanderings of the unpurified soul, he had to ascend several ladders and wander in darkness in a cave with many doors, all of which were locked. When he had overcome the dreadful trials, he received the degree of Pastachores, the 2nd and 3rd degrees being called the Neochorus and Maleneferis. Brought into a vast subterranean chamber thickly furnished with mummies lying in state, he was placed in a presence of the coffin, which contained the mutilated body of Osiris, covered with blood. This was the hall called Gates of Death. And it is most certainly to this mystery that the passages in the book of Job 28:17 and other portions of the Bible allude when these gates are spoken of. In chapter 10, we give the esoteric interpretation of the book of Job, which is the poem of initiation par excellence. Have the gates of death been opened to thee? Hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Asks the Lord, i.e. the Al-Omja, the initiator of Job, alluding to this 3rd degree of initiation. When the neophyte had conquered the terrors of this trial, he was conducted to the hall of spirits to be judged by them. Among the rules in which he was instructed, he was commanded never to either desire or seek revenge, to be always ready to help a brother in danger, even unto the risk of his own life, to bury every dead body, to honor his parents above all, respect old age and protect those weaker than himself, and finally, to ever bear in mind the hour of death and that of resurrection in a new and imperishable body. Purity and chastity were highly recommended, and adultery threatened with death. Then the Egyptian neophyte was made a Christopheres. In this degree, the mystery name of Io was communicated to him. The 5th degree was that of Balahala, and he was instructed by Horus in alchemy, the word being chemia. In the 6th, the priestly dance in the circle was taught him, in which he was instructed in astronomy, for it represented the course of the planets. In the 7th degree, he was initiated into the final mysteries. After a final probation in a building set apart for it, the astronomos, as he was now called, emerged from these sacred apartments called Maneros and received a cross, the Tao, which at death had to be laid upon his breast. He was a Hierophant. The cycle is moving down, and as it descends, the physical and bestial nature of man develops more and more at the expense of the spiritual self. With what disgust may we not turn from this religious farce called modern Christianity to the noble faiths of old. In the Egyptian funeral ritual found among the hymns of the Book of the Dead, and which is termed by Bunsen that precious and mysterious book, we read an address of the deceased in the character of Horus, detailing all that he has done for his father Osiris. Among other things, the deity says, I have given thee thy spirit, I have given thee thy soul, I have given thee thy force, body. In another place, the entity addressed as Father by the disembodied soul is shown to mean the spirit of man, for the verse says, I have made my soul come and speak with his Father, its spirit. The Egyptians regarded their ritual as essentially a divine inspiration, in short, as modern Hindus do the Vedas and modern Jews their Mosaic books. Bunsen and Lepsius show that the term Hermetic means inspired, for it is Thoth, the deity itself, that speaks and reveals to his elect among men the will of God and the arcana of divine things. Portions of them are expressly stated to have been written by the very finger of Thoth himself, to have been the work and composition of the great god. At a later period, their Hermetic character is still more distinctly recognized, and on a coffin of the 26th dynasty, Horus answers to the deceased that Thoth himself has brought him the books of his divine words, or Hermetic writings. Since we are aware that Moses was an Egyptian priest, or at least that he was learned in all their wisdom, we need not be astonished that he should write in Deuteronomy 9:10, "And the Lord delivered unto me 2 tables of stones written with the finger of God," or to find in Exodus 31, "And he, the Lord, gave unto Moses 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God." In the Egyptian notions, as in those of all other faiths founded on philosophy, man was not merely, as with the Christians, a union of soul and body. He was a trinity when spirit was added to it. Besides, that doctrine made him consist of Ka, body, Kaba, astral form or shadow, Ka, animal soul or life principle, Ba, the higher soul, and Ak, terrestrial intelligence. They had also a 6th principle named Sa, or mummy, but the functions of this one commenced only after the death of the body. After due purification, during which the soul, separated from its body, continued to revisit the latter in its mummified condition, this astral soul became a god, for it was finally absorbed into the soul of the world. It became transformed into one of the creative deities, the god of Ta, the Demiurgos, a generic name for the creators of the world, rendered in the Bible as the Elohim. In the ritual, the good or purified soul, in conjunction with its higher or uncreated spirit, is more or less the victim of the dark influence of the dragon Apophis. If it has attained the final knowledge of the heavenly and the infernal mysteries, the gnosis, i.e. complete reunion with the spirit, it will triumph over its enemies. If not, the soul could not escape its second death. It is the lake that burneth with fire and brimstone, elements, into which those that are cast undergo a second death, apocalypse. This death is the gradual dissolution of the astral form into its primal elements, alluded to several times already in the course of this work. But this awful fate can be avoided by the knowledge of the mysterious name, the Word, say the Kabbalists. The potency contained in the mantras and the Vak of the Brahmins is as much believed in at this day as it was in the early Vedic period. The ineffable name of every country and religion relates to that which the Masons affirm to be the mysterious characters emblematic of the 9 names or attributes by which the deity was known to the initiates. The omnific word traced by Enoch on the 2 deltas of purest gold, on which he engraved 2 of the mysterious characters, is perhaps better known to the poor, uneducated heathen than to the highly accomplished grand high priests and grand Z's of the supreme chapters of Europe and America. Only why the companions of the Royal Arch should so bitterly and constantly lament its loss is more than we can understand. This word of MM is, as they will tell themselves, entirely composed of consonants. Hence, we doubt whether any of them could ever have mastered its pronunciation. Had it even been brought to light from the secret vault instead of its several corruptions. However, it is to the land of Mizraim that the grandson of Ham is credited with having carried to the sacred delta of the patriarch Enoch. Therefore, it is in Egypt and in the East alone that this mysterious word must be sought. By now that so many of the most important secrets of Masonry have been divulged by friend and foe, may we not say without suspicion of malice or ill feeling that since the sad catastrophe of the Templars, no lodge in Europe, still less in America, has ever known anything worth concealing. Reluctant to be misunderstood, we say no lodge, leaving a few chosen brethren entirely out of question. The frantic denunciation of the craft by Catholic and Protestant writers appear simply ridiculous, as also the affirmation of the Abbé Baruel that everything betrays our Freemasons as the descendants of those proscribed Knights Templars. Of the memoirs of Jacobinism by this Abbé, an eyewitness to the horrors of the First Revolution, is devoted in great measure to the Rosicrucians and other Masonic fraternities. The fact alone that he traces the modern Masons to the Templars and points them out as secret assassins trained to political murder shows how little he knew of them, but how ardently he desired at the same time to find in these societies convenient scapegoats for the crimes and sins of another secret society which, since its existence, has harbored more than one dangerous political assassin: the Society of Jesus. We sincerely believe that the better portion of humanity will ever bear in mind that there exists a moral code of honor far more binding than an oath, whether on the Bible, Quran, or Veda. The Essenes never swore on anything at all, but their ayes and nays were as good and far better than an oath. It seems to us that to maintain that an oath obliges not if God does not accept it, besides being an absurdity, as no man living, whether he be fallible or infallible, can learn anything of God's secret thoughts, is anti-Christian in the full sense of the word. The argument is brought forward only because it is convenient and answers the object. Oaths will never be binding till each man will fully understand that humanity is the highest manifestation on earth of the unseen, supreme deity, and each man an incarnation of his God, and when the sense of personal responsibility will be so developed in him that he will consider forswearing the greatest possible insult to himself as well as to humanity. No oath is now binding unless taken by one who, without any oath at all, would solemnly keep his simple promise of honor. Therefore, to bring forward as authorities such men as Baruel or Robeson is simply obtaining the public confidence under false pretenses. It is not the spirit of Masonic malice whose heart coins slanders like a mint, but far more that of the Catholic clergy and their champions, and a man who would reconcile the two ideas of honor and perjury, in any case whatever, is not to be trusted himself. We say naught against Masonry as it should be, but denounce it as, thanks to the intriguing clergy, both Catholic and Protestant, it now begins to be. Professedly the most absolute of democracies, it is practically the appanage of aristocracy, wealth, and personal ambition. Professedly the teacher of true ethics, it is debased into a propaganda of anthropomorphic theology. The half-naked apprentice brought before the master during the initiation of the first degree is taught that at the door of the lodge every social distinction is laid aside and the poorest brother is the peer of every other, though a reigning sovereign or an imperial prince. In practice, the craft turns lickspittle in every monarchical country to any regal scion who may deign, for the sake of using it as a political tool, to put on the once symbolical lambskin.